Hi, guys. I wanted to do an update on Trump's tariffs. If you missed my last breakdown back in April when Trump first announced his tariffs, Liberation Day as he called it, I laid out his plans and some of the questions around them. And you can check that out on my YouTube channel. But it's been 4 months since then, so where do we stand now? Well, let's look at what President Trump promised. He says it'll fix America's economy, raise revenue, bring down the US deficit, and even out trade deficits with other countries. Now, to recap, a trade deficit is simply what the US sells to another country versus what it buys from them, and Trump wants that to be equal. Now, in my previous tariffs video, I explained why that's easier said than done. The other thing is he wants to reduce US deficit, the deficit being the gap between what the government spends and what it brings in, mostly through taxes, but also from things like tariffs, fees, fines, and sometimes investments. So are these tariffs delivering on Trump's promises? Let's look at revenue. Are these tariffs bringing in more cash to the US government? The short answer is yes. According to data from the US Treasury Department, in July alone, tariff revenue almost quadrupled compared to the same time last year, jumping from about $7 billion to nearly $28 billion. The Congressional Budget Office estimates the revenue from tariffs could reduce the deficit by up to $4 trillion over the next 10 years. Sounds great, right? Well, the problem is government spending also went up. So in July, the US brought in nearly $28 billion from tariffs, but Washington still spent more than $600 billion, leaving a deficit of nearly $300 billion. So tariffs barely made a dent. Now, I know it's still early days, of course, but this means even if tariffs keep raking in the revenue, spending has to be cut massively. So why is spending up so much? It's partly because of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, a signature piece of Trump's second term agenda, where taxes were cut and spending was reshaped. The bill is projected to reduce revenues by 3 to 4 trillion over the next decade, mostly because of tax cuts. So in short, tariff revenues over the next 10 years are projected to be around $4 trillion, but spending is also expected to be around $4 trillion. So basically, they cancel each other out. Okay, so that was probably a bit too much geekiness for anyone's brain, so here's a panda picture. Next, how do the tariffs affect the everyday person? Well, the most basic way is how it hits your back pocket. Tariffs are essentially a tax on goods going into the US. Pretty much any imported good now has an added tax. So for instance, if you buy shoes from China, they now have an added tax on them. The government says the companies exporting those goods to the US pay the tariffs. But in reality, consumers end up picking up the extra tax. The Yale Budget Lab, which is a nonpartisan research center, estimates that if you add all the tariffs together, consumers face an overall tariff rate of 17.5% to 18.5%, the highest since the 1930s. And that adds up to an extra $2,000 to $2,400 a year for each household. So what about businesses? Some manufacturers may benefit, but any US business that has to buy raw materials from abroad is going to face higher costs. That could be a restaurant buying ingredients. It could be car makers getting auto parts. GM, for instance, says its costs are up $1 billion in the second quarter of the year. Now, many companies can absorb those costs, but over time, they might need to cut jobs, lower wages, stop investing, or pass the costs on to buyers. Smaller companies may not have the cash to do any of that, and they may have to shut down altogether. What businesses can't plan around is uncertainty. So, for instance, if the White House says it's reducing tariffs on a country, but then reverses its policy, then some companies might decide to pull out of the US altogether. That brings me to the final point. Do these tariffs protect American workers as Trump says they will? The jobless rate is at about 4.2%, up just a little. But nearly a quarter of unemployed Americans have been out of work for more than 6 months. That's well below the pandemic peak of nearly 50%, but that's the highest since February 2022. And economists keep an eye on that number because the longer people are out of the job force, the harder it is to get in. Add to that, job growth is slowing. The Yale Budget Lab projects about 500,000 fewer jobs by the end of the year because of tariffs. So bringing it all together, tariffs do bring in billions, but government spending cancels that out. And the longer the tariffs are in place, the less you may have in your wallet. So people are likely to spend less, businesses are likely to cut back, and that slows the overall economy. Okay, so that's your tariff update. Hope that's helped cut through some of the noise. DM me or drop your comments below. And for more of these breakdowns, subscribe to my YouTube channel. Links are in my bios. Thanks for watching.